and welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. My name is Prav Prathapan, and I'm from Encephalitis International. Today, we're joined by a mother who is changing the world, not just for her own child, but for so many others, the founder of Milkshakes for Marleigh, Kate Fisher. Kate, welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you here. So you have a podcast called Milkshakes for Marleigh. You have a book of the same name, and of
Mhm.
course, someone in the world who's pretty important called Marleigh. Marleigh became unwell at the age of 3 and was eventually diagnosed with seronegative paediatric autoimmune encephalitis. So just to start off, could you tell us a bit about Marleigh and her story?
Oh, thank you so much for starting the interview that way because people often do it the other way around. They want to hear about all of the gory details to start with, but they forget that underneath that, there's a little girl who, loves to play with slime and loves My Little Pony and has two older brothers and is at the moment at her guinea pig care lesson that she does. So she has a couple of days a week that she spends with a centre called Neurodivergent Empowerment, also has autism. And having that low sensory environment has been so important with her brain injury from the autoimmune encephalitis, and doing guinea pig care once a week and then her riding for the disabled horse riding lesson that she has once a week are some of her favorite things. So before all of this, during it and after it, there was a beautiful, beautiful little girl who just wanted to bring joy to the world. And that's what she continues to do every single day. She inspires me.
Wow. So that was Marleigh before, and then of course this devastating thing happened to her. Can you walk us through what happened?
Yeah, so happy, healthy little girl until she was about 3. We had no indication that anything was wrong. And to put that in context, I am the mum at the helm of a family with additional needs. So her two older brothers also have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and global developmental delay. So having differences in our family. So, physical and neurodevelopmental disability isn't something that was new to our family. So, compared to the way that the boys had been developing, Marleigh was tracking along so much more advanced, meeting all of her milestones. We really didn't have any concerns. And then at about the age of 3, she started two things when I look back are quite prominent. The first one is that she started having these funny little spells where she'd kind of just stare off into the distance a little bit. And then it was like she'd come back into the room. Now, for anybody who's familiar with encephalitis and the potential side effects, will know that that was likely the beginning of absence seizures that she was having. But let's be honest, like she was 3. 3-year-olds do weird things, like a 3-year-old staring off into the distance and not concentrating well or being easily distracted isn't particularly notable, interesting. And then we saw what I now recognize as the beginning of the psychiatric symptoms associated with it. We just thought she was throwing really big tantrums. And anyone who's had a 2 or a 3-year-old knows developmentally about that age, big tantrums are just par for the course. That's what happens when you have a child at about that age. So it was quite tricky. I think looking back, I realized that it had been building for a little while. It wasn't the really sudden onset that I have heard some other people describe. Um, we started to get quite concerned when she stopped meeting her milestones and then started to regress with her development. So that was across her fine and her motor skills and her speech. And there was obviously something just really not quite right with Marleigh. This was also a little bit tricky at that time because all 3 of our children were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes within a 6-month period. So that ended up going on to be a very rare type of genetic diabetes that our whole family has, but that's a story for another podcast. I guess what I mean is she had so many competing things that, you know, big feelings, staring off into space, all of those things could easily have been the diabetes and not the autoimmune encephalitis that she was eventually diagnosed with. So from that point, we had probably about a 6-month period where she had started having seizures, the more tonic-clonic style seizures. Not massive full body ones though, like it would just be one side of her mouth. We would see just the left side of her mouth start to twitch. Sometimes it would just be fingers and it was over a short period of time. Again, little kids do weird things. So it took us quite a while to be able to work out exactly what was happening. And We actually took her to Sydney to see an incredible neurologist and immunologist who sat with her for 30 minutes during the appointment and said to me, is this what Marleigh's normally like? And I was like, yeah, well, this is, she's actually doing really well today. And he said, look, she's had multiple absent seizures while you've been sitting in this room that you're not recognizing. You're not putting her in the car and taking her back to Canberra, which is about a 3 or 4 hour drive. He said, I don't think that's a good idea. He admitted her straight into hospital, did an overnight EEG, and from that, she was diagnosed with epilepsy. So to start with, we put her on medications, but the seizures kept progressing. So we just thought that she had epilepsy that wasn't responding to the medication. After about that 6-month period, we had increased it to 3 different anticonvulsant medications, and she just wasn't getting better. And the seizures were increasing in terms of their severity, and the postictal period afterwards where she was recovering. She'd often have multiple hours afterwards where she was completely unrousable, like full painful stimulus. She couldn't get anything out of her. And then we had a significant seizure at home that she responded to having the injection, the recovery injection, and that managed the midazolam, brought her out of it. And from that point, I think things really changed. So she was about 4 at this point. We were in the Canberra hospital. I remember it so clearly. It's so funny. We all but lived in hospital for multiple years, but this particular half an hour is so etched in my brain that she was sitting on the bed. She was looking at her iPad and just watching some shows on her iPad. And she was like, oh, the world's gone fuzzy. Okay, baby, tell me what that means. And we now know that that was the start of that double vision that would start to happen. And it's fuzzy. And then she wanted to put it down and she got really irritated and she wanted to get down off the bed. So we got her down off the bed and she just walked headfirst into a cupboard, like just got down off the bed. She was standing and then just totally drifted sideways headfirst into a cupboard. And it was like the first few times that you see a teenager experiment with alcohol and that first feeling of being drunk. That's the only way I can describe it. It's like my 4-year-old was drunk. And she was coming in and out of different periods of being able to respond and understanding what was happening. And the next 2 weeks after that, things didn't resolve very well at all. The seizures really increased in frequency. Now, bear in mind, during that time, we just thought we were trying to find the right epilepsy medication for her, the right anticonvulsant that would stop these seizures. But also lots of other tests were going on in the background, obviously. So, she had a brain MRI to rule out a brain tumor. She hadn't had a lumbar puncture at that point, but we, were planning to do one the next time that she had a general anesthetic because she was only little. We had done lots and lots of different tests and nothing was coming back particularly definitive, apart from the fact that she was having these seizures that weren't responding to the medication in the way that they should. And this all came to a head where she had a really, really massive seizure and we'd used that many anticonvulsants that we lost an airway and she needed to be intubated and ventilated. And unfortunately, even though we were living in the nation's capital, in Canberra, in Australia, there is no paediatric intensive care unit in Canberra. So we needed to be airlifted to Sydney to a children's hospital that had a paediatric intensive care unit. And luckily, the initial neurologist and immunologist that we had seen in Sydney, we were able to have her transferred to that hospital. And without a doubt, he saved her life from that point. So when we first got into the paediatric intensive care unit, it was thought that she had had a stroke. They didn't think that it was anything different to that. So we needed to have an MRI with contrast. And after that MRI with contrast the next day, it showed that she hadn't had a stroke, but she had lost all mobility on the left side of her body. She was in an induced coma, but they were doing the nerve conduction tests and they had no response whatsoever to those. It was very puzzling. We didn't know what was going to happen. It was a long weekend and there was public holidays, but they called in a genetics team to do a rapid trio. So they took samples from my husband and I and for Marleigh because she was in a life-threatening situation to see if we could find a genetic component. And I'll never forget the head of the paediatric intensive care unit coming and having a chat to me. And he just said, look, this is not something that I see often, but I'm pretty sure that I know what's going on with your little girl. But I need your consent to do things kind of backwards. I want to try a medication to see if it helps, and that will help us with the diagnosis. And that was a high dose of intravenous steroids and intravenous immunoglobulin infusion, which is made from the donated human plasma. So lots of your listeners probably hear it referred to as IVIG, and I know that a lot of people with autoimmune encephalitis have that as a treatment. And he said the concern is that it might be too much for her little body to use those steroids to reduce the inflammation on her brain. But I'm out of answers. I don't know what else we're going to do. And she's, she was in an induced coma. She was on a ventilator for support. She was only just hanging on. And so, of course, we gave consent for that to happen. And it was the first time that we saw a little bit of improvement. It wasn't immediate, but we started to see some improvement, and we started to have a little bit of hope that maybe our little girl would survive this. And that was what threw us into the crazy world that is having a child with autoimmune encephalitis. The next 17 months of that journey ended up looking like her not being able to survive for longer than 10 days at a time without having IVIG. Now, I don't know what the protocols are around the world, so edit this out if it's not applicable to your podcast. But in Australia, it's a single dose every 4 weeks. So your induction dose is a double dose in the first 4 weeks. And then after that, if you need it ongoing, then you have a single dose once a month. The only way that we could stop Marleigh from having massive status epilepticus seizures, and when I say massive, the longest one that she had was a 39-hour status epilepticus seizure, was to give it every 10 days. So, well, every 2 weeks. So what that would look like is we would go into hospital for 3 to 4 days to have a double dose of IVIG and IV steroids, and then we would leave the hospital knowing that we could likely preserve her life for another 10 days. If we tried to shorten that 10-day period, she'd have the massive seizures. And so in the words of her paediatric immunologist, IVIG is life-saving for Marleigh in those acute situations where she has a relapse, and life-preserving for every infusion in between. And that has very much underpinned all of the work that we have done with Milkshakes for Marleigh. So with the book and the podcast, where we tell the extraordinary tales of survival from those who have received those blood products to thank their donors and to encourage new ones. What's really important to know about this story, and the scary part of this story, is that the story that I just told you happened in the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So when Marleigh was being transported in a helicopter, my husband had to just say goodbye to her in Canberra because we had closed borders between the states. So the Australian Capital Territory is a territory itself that sits inside New South Wales, which is where she was being airlifted to. And so he didn't know whether he was going to be able to cross the border to get across to see her, whether he would have to leave our older children who also have additional needs and don't like change in Canberra to be able to come to Sydney to be with the hospital with her. It was just a really, really tricky time to be going through that. And also blood donor rates, because people weren't able to leave their houses, were also at record lows. So we would leave the hospital and she would have an infusion, and then we would just have to be at the whim of the kindness of Australian blood donors to be able to donate peak COVID pandemic so that we could keep our child alive for another 10 days. And we couldn't we couldn't look at our future with Marleigh in it further than 10 days at a time. And I just don't ever want another family to have to feel like that if I can avoid it. And that's why I have now committed my life to blood donation advocacy. And I know, look, it's different all around the world. Some people do it paid. Some people you have to pay for the products. We are extraordinarily grateful that this happened to Marleigh and that we lived in Australia, because there's no doubt in my mind that had it happened in lots of different countries around the world, there's no chance that Marleigh would still be alive. Obviously, we would have exhausted all of our financial resources to try and make that happen. But there's lots of places in the world we just, as awful as this sounds, we wouldn't have been able to afford to keep her alive. And that just makes me feel sick that other people in the world need to endure that. So we have really expanded the platform of Milkshakes for Marleigh now, not just within Australia, but the mission is to end persistent critical blood shortages in Australia and around the world. And we've had incredible success in different countries of the world. You know, people send me selfies all the time doing a blood donation from really random places in the world. We know that in Australia, in the last 3 years, that over 10,000 Australian lives have been saved by people who have been inspired to donate blood after hearing Marleigh's story. She's got a
Wow.
lifeblood team. So anyone listening who's in Australia, if you go and make a blood donation, make sure your donation is registered to the Milkshakes for Marleigh lifeblood team. And that gives us the ability to track the impact that she has had. And there's so much to this story that I really want it to be one of hope. There was so many yucky things in the middle, so many seizures, so many nights that we, said goodbye to her, not thinking that we were ever going to see her again. At one stage, they thought she had COVID and she was taken into isolation. We had to say goodbye to her, and it was expected that she would die alone without us. And if you are interested in the details of that, then please go to the podcast, or please grab a copy of the book. I won't go into the details too much of that today because I want this to be a story of hope. So we ended up moving to the incredible state of Queensland in Australia, and we live on the Sunshine Coast now. She lives the most incredible, fulfilling and beautiful life. She's got a brain injury. She has a seizure response service dog who is always with her and can reliably alert to her seizures sort of 2 to 4 hours before the onset of them, which has saved her life and allowed my husband and I to sleep more times than I can tell you. And 5 years ago when we moved up here, she was mixed use in a wheelchair. She was using a speech device to learn how to communicate. So much of this can only be attributed to the fact that she has worked so hard in all of her rehabilitation and all of her therapy, but she's independently mobile. She's got the most beautiful friends. She doesn't use a speech device anymore. And the, shower commode and the wheelchair and everything are now in storage. Doesn't mean that we won't go back there. And look, she's relapsed before. So there's so little information to tell us exactly what this is likely to look like for Marleigh. And look, I'm sure listeners who have had this experience will likely reflect this, is that it completely changes your outlook on life. It's changed our outlook on life as a family, and we're just so bloody grateful for every day, like just the really little things, like the joy of being able to sit around a table together as a family and have dinner. Watching my kids swim in the pool together, after they finish school of an afternoon, even when they're bickering and driving me crazy, because look, that doesn't stop just because you've had something really tricky happen in your life. All of those things still need to keep happening. But the fact that, we've still got her is just extraordinary. And having spent years essentially living in and out of children's hospitals with her, I know that we're the lucky ones that got to bring our child home. So many of the families that we got close to didn't. And I have to keep being brave, and I have to keep telling Marleigh's story because I know that it makes a difference. And we're the lucky people that still have her in our world. So I guess the summary of Milkshakes for Marleigh is there is so much good in humanity because people keep volunteering to donate the blood that she needs to keep her alive. And that's given her 6 bonus birthday cakes. She was 3 when she became unwell. She's now 9, and she's blown out 6 bonus sets of birthday candles, thanks to Australian blood donors. And all of my work is really just to thank those donors and to encourage new ones if I can along the way.
That's amazing. That's such a message of hope, and thank you so much for that. And like what I love about your podcast is that it is about hope. What most people do is they say perhaps, please donate, please help. What you've done is share people's stories who have been
Mm.
recipients.
Mm.
And I was wondering, actually, are there any episodes of the podcast that have stood out to you personally in particular?
So if you're somewhere else around the world and you're looking for a story that's got really clear Australian flavour, I think Joel Mason is one that's in there. So it's a really cracker of an Aussie story with a really good Aussie bloke. He was surfing off the coast of New South Wales, had been surfing all of his life, bitten by a shark. Some people helped to bring him into the sand, and a helicopter is called to airlift him. As they're waiting for the helicopter to arrive, he hears the paramedics that are with him on the sand say to the helicopter that's coming, if you don't have blood on that helicopter, don't bother coming because he's going to bleed out. on the sand before he gets there. And so they brought blood. They gave him an infusion on the sand before they put him in the helicopter. They had to stop, like it's only a 40-minute chopper flight, but they had to stop on the way there to pick up some blood that had been donated in a small coastal town that was in between the hospital and where he had been bitten. And that's like, if people hadn't donated in the, you know, the days beforehand to have that product sitting there, there's no way that he would survive. And look, he is now doing incredible things. He's a dad. He's got 3 kids. He, you know, is a teacher. He's putting so many incredible things into the world that he wouldn't be able to if people hadn't made those appointments to make those blood donations. One that your listeners, well, 2, in fact, I'll point out that your listeners will love is Michael Klim, who is one of Australia's most prolific champion Olympic swimmers and just a bloody good bloke. I just love him. Klimmy's a great bloke. Very similar to the condition that Marleigh has. So he has chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, CIDP. And so essentially same as Marleigh's autoimmune encephalitis that's impacting her brain, his is impacting his nervous system, so in his legs primarily. And he and Marleigh have met a few times. If you go to the Milkshakes for Marleigh Instagram page, you'll see there's photos and reels there of them meeting. And, you know, this, you know, 6'6", whatever he is, of man who is a world record, you know, so many gold medals, you can't count them. Ridiculous, incredible, successful man. And just looking at our little girl just wept because he was just like, I just can't fathom that a little girl could go through even close to what I've been going through. You know, I just can't. And she's still smiling and she just sees the best in the world. And I say this because it's so true to our story, but after everything that Marleigh has been through, and look, she does have PTSD from significant medical trauma. There's no way of, you know, I think we all do, you know. It's such a horrific and horrible time, and we had so many yucky interventions to keep her alive. And I say she's well within her rights to be a complete asshole. Like, she is so, like, she could hate the world. She could be cynical. She could be horrible. And she's just not. It's like, she doesn't suffer fools. She doesn't have time for drama. Like, she just doesn't understand other little girls and fighting over things and bitchiness and being mean. She's just like, God, get a real problem. Like, this is ridiculous. When you look at what you could possibly have gone through, she just doesn't get it. But apart from that, she's just so kind and she's so full of joy and hope and wants to do kind things for other people. And she doesn't have to be that person. I guess that's just innately who she is. I had the absolute pleasure last week on my national book tour during National Blood Donor Week in Australia of meeting Beck Jones. So she has autoimmune encephalitis. She has IVIG, such a similar story to Marleigh's. And she is also a member of the Paramatildas. So people in Australia and around the world, because they're epic, will know about our incredible women's soccer team, the Matildas, and all the incredible things that they do. So the Paramatildas are a women's soccer team who have brain injuries of some kind. So a lot of them have had strokes. Autoimmune encephalitis is one of them. There's a few other different conditions as well that have resulted in some form of brain injury. And they became world champions last year in Spain, and she was a member of that team. And to be able to have Marleigh know that she has been through similar things to what Marleigh has been through, have the bravery to share that story, and then be able to show Marleigh videos of her on a world stage as a world champion, doing some, especially soccer, because it is quite physical. And it doesn't have to be a sport. I think it's that idea of the fact that you can still dream big, even if you have a brain injury. You might have to slightly adjust the goalpost sometimes to make it look a little bit different, but there's still so many phenomenal things that you can do. And, you know, at the beginning of this journey, I couldn't have imagined that Marleigh would be living such a phenomenal, fulfilling life. And it doesn't look like the way we expected our lives as a family or her life to look, but my gosh, we appreciate every single minute of it because we've still got her and we know how lucky we are.
That's incredible. I understand that Marley is also doing school part-time and also has started learning karate. Is that true as well?
Yes, she has. So we have actually just slightly adjusted. She was doing part-time schooling. We've just slightly adjusted that to be doing a more homeschool model now, and the neurodivergent empowerment nest that I was talking about before, to be putting her in settings that have got lower sensory stimulation. Our neurologist really just explained that she's just not going to learn with her brain injury. She's not going to intake information in the same way if she's in a high sensory environment. So we really focus on the things that she loves, being her social interactions now. And she has just started riding as well at a rehab place where she gets to do equine therapy, and she gets to do some of her physical rehabilitation through that way. And she's just, I mean, My Little Pony, like, she's just horse mad. She just absolutely adores it all. So she's right into that, and just seeing her have a love of learning. Like, she loves to read, and she's so creative. Like, this kid, like, I love that after something like this, she doesn't second guess, if I draw something, will it look good? She's just so excited about the fact that she can draw now because she's worked so hard to regain that skill. And it's such a perspective that, like, I would overthink things when I created something, some people are creative, some people aren't. I didn't know until I wrote a book and had a podcast that apparently I am creative. It just doesn't look like drawing and painting, but she doesn't overthink it. She's just so glad that she can do it. And that's a special kind of joy. So yeah, our house is covered in glitter and slime and paint, and she's just a little creative soul that's just exploded in our world. So yeah, she's
That's
pretty
incredible.
special. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. One of the other things I've heard is that you were also invited by the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, to speak in London. So could you
Yeah.
tell us what that was like? That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it was, yeah. So I've been twice now over to London for the Women Changing the World Awards and Summit. So the first year I went over for one of the awards, and I won an award as an emerging leader. And I think I really realized, being in that room with so many incredible people who were, making big changes in lots of different places around the world, was that my blood donation advocacy really did deserve a place on a global stage. And it was quite different to the approaches that people were taking all over the world. Um, and was absolutely honored the following year to be invited back to give a keynote address to that group of people. And it wasn't just about blood donation, it was just about, being a change maker is really just having a creative solution to a social challenge. And that's really what Milkshakes for Marleigh is. I would never ask someone if they're a blood donor, even though, I've been heralded as revolutionizing blood donation advocacy on a global scale. I really have trouble admitting that out loud, but it is true. I would never say, "Are you a blood donor?" I would never, never, never do that. What I will do is tell the stories of people who have received blood so that I can thank donors and encourage new ones. And it's that slightly different approach, I guess, to, health and social policy change. And so, yeah, being asked to go back the next year to be able to address those people, catching up with the Duchess again and having her ask about, how's Marleigh? You have to bring her over here. Just being remembered in that way was quite extraordinary. And while we're name dropping, I went to the podcast show while I was in London, which is the biggest international podcasting conference in the world. Had seen a few different people give, addresses, and I had seen James Corden give his address, standing there with a copy of my book in the hope that I could, slip it to one of his minders or something so that he could maybe see it. I don't know. I did it with lots of people. It wasn't just him. I just got lucky with him. And he actually saw me standing with the cover of my book, and he was like, "Oh my God, that Australian chick, like that's that Australian podcast." And I was like, "I'm that Australian podcaster. Marleigh is my daughter." And he was so gracious and he was so kind. And I know lots of people have different, stories to tell about what they think about different celebrities, but in my experience, he was absolutely gorgeous. He took me out the back to the green room, and introduced me to lots of other different, international podcasting platforms and the people that run them. And it was just so kind and so gracious. And I realized the power of podcasting and the power of storytelling. And when you look at the way that our podcast is listened to around the world, that we have really good, like decent stats, not just one listen at an airport while someone was traveling through, but good stats in 19 different countries in the world at the moment, where we have an audience that we capture regularly. So to know that that message is going all around the world, whether it's about blood donation or just the fact that there is some good in humanity. As we're recording this today, the world looks like a bit of a scary place. So it's nice to know that there is still so many people doing such incredible things. And, when the world looks awful, then you look for the helpers. We say to our kids all the time, don't focus on the tragedy or the horrible thing that's happening. Try and look for the people that are running to help the people that are in trouble. And yeah, that's what blood donors are. And that's what they have been to keep our family together. And for us, that means not just keeping Marleigh alive, but it keeps a little girl with her big brothers, and it keeps a daughter with her parents. And, she gets to stay as part of her horse riding team, slime making community, all of those things that, yeah, it keeps us all together. And we will forever be incredibly grateful for that.
That's incredible. And I love that catching up with the Duchess, just, casually dropping that was lovely. But that is so hopeful. And we are coming to the end of this podcast, unfortunately. But I do want to kind of come back to blood donation. And I was wondering, what would you want to see in terms of the change in the conversation about blood donation?
Yeah. So statistics vary around the world, obviously, but in Australia, 1 in 3 people will need blood within their lifetime, and yet only 1 in 30 people ever donate it. And if you take nothing else out of this podcast today, I just want you to think about, next time you're sitting in the car with your family or around the dinner table or with your sporting team or with your colleagues or whatever it is, some people that you value, I just want you to look over your left shoulder and look over your right shoulder at the people sitting either side of you. And if you think that either your life or the life of one of those people is worth saving, then I really encourage you to make a blood donation, because 1 in 3 of us will need it within our lifetime. Now, whether that's in an acute setting, you've had an accident of some kind, whether it's just that you need some platelets while you are undergoing treatment for something like cancer, whether you have some kind of challenge in your immune system. And, listeners to the pod who, are across the brain inflammation space will know how incredible IVIG is in saving lives. And yeah, just really consider it. And even if you only ever do one blood donation, one ever time in your life, you can know that that's some good that you have put into the world. And, above all, I just really want to thank the incredible blood donors who have kept Marleigh alive. And I encourage people to keep telling their stories, however it is, tell those stories of survival. You will never actually meet the particular donor that you have met. But if you are a blood donor in Australia or somewhere else around the world, you can listen to the Milkshakes for Marleigh podcast and wonder if you were the one who saved or improved the quality of life for the person featured on the podcast. And it's a pretty good feeling. As a blood donor myself, long-time blood donor, it's a really nice feeling to know that you could have contributed to that in some way. And if you can't donate blood, please join me in my blood donation advocacy instead. And that can mean, downloading some episodes of my podcast. Don't start with Marleigh's episode if you want to keep listening to them, because it is a bit of a tearjerker. And definitely don't listen to Marleigh's episode, which is the first one, while you're driving. I really feel like I need to tell people that, because there may be some tears. But remember, she's 9 and she's doing brilliantly now. And it's documentary style. So you can just have a scroll through, pick an episode that you're interested in and just listen to it as a standalone. Or, jump on the Milkshakes for Marleigh Instagram page, share some of my posts, or whatever the lifeblood or blood donation, place is in the part of the world that you're in. Jump on there and share some of that. Yeah, not everyone can donate blood, but everyone can be a blood donation advocate. And I really encourage you to do that.
Brilliant. Kate Fisher, founder of Milkshake for Marleigh, thank you so much for being on the Encephalitis podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And I'd like to thank you, the audience, as well, for listening and watching. We hope you have found this episode of the Encephalitis Podcast helpful. If you have been affected by any of the issues raised wherever you live in the world, please contact our support services. Encephalitis International is here to help in whatever way we can to achieve our aim of ending death and disability from encephalitis. If you can support our work, we'd be extremely grateful. Please visit www.encephalitis.info/donate. Thank you again, and see you next time on the Encephalitis Podcast.